Ngayong araw na ito sa Serbisyong Korean ay kasama natin ang hindi na ito bisita partner na natin to every other Thursday dito sa Serbisyong Korean at yung pangarap namin kanina maging abogado ay ngayon nandito na kami, kasama na namin isang abogado.
Isang abogado.
Hanggang doon lang muna tayo. Kasama natin ang isang Batikanong abogado na magdidiscuss sa atin patungkol sa mga batas na dapat nating ma-enjoy at malaman. Kasama natin ngayon mga kapatid, ang ating dati nang nakakasama dito, suki na natin to, Atty. Francesco Britanico. Good morning po, Attorney.
Good morning, Sir Rico, Sir Ronnie. Good morning ulit sa inyong dalawa at sa lahat ng nakikinig at nanonood.
Atty. Francesco Britanico. Bakit mo
Sir, baka may...
Good morning, Sir Rico, Sir Ronnie. Good morning ulit sa inyong dalawa.
Mon, merong sumasabay.
duplicated ang sound natin. Sir,
Ayun. Ulitin natin tabi, Attorney. Good morning tabi, Attorney.
Good morning po ulit. Good morning, sir. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat at sa lahat ng nakikinig.
Mukhang wala ka sa opisina mo ngayon, Attorney. Mukhang nasa labas kayo at iba yung background mo ngayon.
Opisina pa rin po ito sa aming conference room.
Okay. Akala ko naapektahan ka rin ng naapektahan kayo ng gulo ng Senado kagabi.
Hindi naman po. Hindi naman po, pero napaka ano po pala nito. Napaka kakaiba ang nangyari.
Oo nga. Alam ko, Attorney, na iba ang naihanda mong pag-uusapan natin ngayon. Pero pwede ba nating slightly pag-usapan ang patungkol doon?
Well, nakita ko lang yung nangyari kagabi. Nakita ko yung balita ngayon. At na masasabi ko, hindi ko alam kung ano nangyari.
Oo nga nagtuturuan sila, Attorney, kung paano nakapasok yung mga armed individual doon sa napakahigpit na seguridad sa Senado.
At kung sino at kung alin, kung ano man, sinasabi nila magkakaroon ng investigasyon. So, tingnan na lang po natin siguro.
Oo nga, Attorney. At patungkol doon, Attorney, sa hindi ko alam kung pwede ito natin pag-usapan kasi ito talaga ang tanong ng taong bayan kasi magkakaiba ang pananaw ng mga abogado dito, Attorney, patungkol sa ICC warrant of arrest na di umano, wala siyang power, wala siyang tawag dito, wala siyang authority na directly ma-serve sa isang Filipino citizen na walang warrant of arrest galing mismo dito sa ating local courts.
For that, sir, dahil hindi ko ito linya, hindi ko siya mako-comment into a definite way. I would not hazard an opinion on the specifics, particularly of the specific case.
I understand.
Meron po tayong situation where the statute has certain provisions and then yun po pinag-aawayan nila ngayon sa Korte Suprema.
Opo.
Kung ano po yung interpretasyon ng linya doon sa ating international human rights law na batas.
So itong sa Korte Suprema, Attorney, ano ang ibig sabihin, Attorney, na magpapaliwanag ang mga pinapaliwanag ng Korte Suprema ang gobyerno, yung PNP, yung NBI tungkol doon sa ina-apply na TRO ni Senador Bato de la Rosa. Anong ibig sabihin po ng mag-explain sila?
Well, procedurally, ang nangyari po is that yung kampo po ng senador ay humihingi sila ng TRO to prevent the implementation of the perceived impending arrest. Pero instead of granting the restraining order, the Supreme Court told the government officers, yung mga kapulisan natin, to present their opinion and their position with respect to yung hinihingi na TRO. So, ang nangyayari po, kung ang TRO po kasi ay, even if wala pang sagot, ay pwede siyang i-grant ng korte. Pero in this case, hindi siya binigay. At ang nangyari po ay pinapasagot yung kabila. And in the meantime, that would mean that wala pong TRO and the decision or at least the ruling of the Supreme Court is just to wait and hear both sides.
So dahil walang TRO, anytime pwedeng arrestahin si General de la Rosa?
Well, that really goes into the interpretation of what is their position ng gobyerno. So, walang TRO against that. So, it becomes to it comes to specifics and discretion siguro. And again, yung provision po ng batas na yan, until it's resolved by the Supreme Court, it's going to be an argument between parties.
Last na lang po tungkol dyan, attorney. Ito bagang pagkanlong ng Senado kay Senador Ronald de la Rosa. Ito po ba ay nakasulat sa batas o ito po ba ay ano lang? Senate, parang ditong ano lang nila? Guidelines lang nila. Sa kanila lang ito, sa Senate.
Well, sa ating constitution, yung ating mga legislators are protected from being questioned or being arrested, in fact, for crimes up to 6 years. Pero with a charge like this, or of course that there's the complication that this is an international charge. So nagkakaroon po ng interplay between how do you interpret the constitutional protections accorded to legislators and also with respect to the implementation or the non-implementation of a charge or a warrant of arrest against that person. So meron pong constitutional protections, whether or not they apply is precisely part of the question that they're arguing right now.
Yeah, so mahirap talagang pakialaman yan, ano? Kasi depende sa interpretation nila, attorney. So anyway, attorney, punta na po tayo sa ating i-discuss ngayon. Ano po yung kailangan nating i-discuss ngayon, attorney?
Well, yung one topic po that we have is that yung recognition of a foreign divorce in the Philippines. Dahil this is also has an international aspect dahil sa ating batas until now, except for sa mga Muslim marriages, wala tayong divorce. Ang Senado po natin until now has not approved it. But since 1988, meron po tayong provision sa ating family code where if a divorce is obtained between a Filipino and a non-Filipino, the marital status of the Filipino can also be recognized as being divorced. So if it happens overseas, magkaroon po ng divorce overseas, pwede po ma-recognize ito sa Pilipinas. So this is a case of private international law, and ang effect po niya is that if a divorce takes place and if at least one of the spouses is a non-Filipino, the marital status pwede na magiging single na rin po kung dumaan sa recognition process yung Filipino spouse who was divorced.
Malinaw ho yan, attorney, kung doon sila sa ibang bansa kinasal. At doon din sila nagpa-divorce.
Kung saan man sila kinasal, as long as mangyari yung divorce overseas and validly divorced na yung asawa na dayuhan. Kasi ang provision na ito ay ginawa dahil mayroong anomalous situation where you can have a divorce where the foreign spouse is considered divorced sa ilalim ng kanilang batas, pero yung Filipino, dahil wala tayong divorce law, would still be considered as still being married. So parang nasa limbo yung Filipino.
Parang unfair naman yan, attorney.
Yes, so ang ginawa po ng family code natin since 1988 is that actually there's a process for recognizing the divorce. The divorce of the spouses, pwede pong kahit nangyayari to, for example, let's say in Chicago or sa anumang ibang bansa, anong ibang syudad outside of the Philippines, if that divorce happens and one of the spouses is a non-Filipino, and that includes a former Filipino, if at the time of the divorce merong non-Filipino doon sa mag-asawa, yung divorce na yon can have an effect in the Philippines. Although it still requires a court case. You file a court case sa Pilipinas, you prove to the Philippine court na nagkaroon ng divorce sa kabilang bansa na valid ito, na yung asawa mo or ikaw was a non-Filipino at the time of the marriage, and then yung marital status mo dito magiging single also.
Meron ganitong sitwasyon, attorney. Amerikana and Filipino nag-asawa, nagpakasal sa Pilipinas, tapos hindi nagtagal, nagkasawaan siguro, pumunta yung American sa bumalik sa kanila, divorce sila doon sa US, pero ang Pilipino nanatiling kasal sa Pilipinas. So nakapangasawa na ulit yung Amerikana, yung Filipino hindi nakakapangasawa dahil hindi siya annulled dito sa Pilipinas.
Yes. So in that situation, pinapayagan tayo ng batas natin to file a case sa city or province where you got married to prove to the court there that nangyari na yung divorce sa US. Ipe-present mo yung divorce decree na naka-certified, ipe-present mo yung divorce law ng, let's say, California, proving na may divorce sa California, and then if you're able to prove those things, you can testify and show to the court that authentic yung documents na yan, nangyari talaga yung divorce, and then the court will issue an order recognizing the divorce and ordering that your marriage certificate will be annotated to reflect na hindi na po kayo kasal sa Pilipinas.
Pero sir, attorney, ginawa na nila yun. Pero ang tagal-tagal hanggang ngayon, mga sabihin nating 7 years na, hanggang ngayon, hindi pa rin umuusad yung kanilang
Kaso.
kaso.
Yung kaso, nag-file sila sa Pilipinas? ng
Yes,
recognition?
opo. Hanggang ngayon, hindi pa naaayos.
Siguro po, i-inquire po kailangan siguro kung ano yung sitwasyon. Sometimes, in cases like this, nakikita namin is that yung divorce decree, baka mahirap kunin sa kabilang bansa. Yung divorce law, baka hindi nila nakumpleto. And because of that, they need to coordinate with somebody or to get it from the foreign country mismo. Kasi kailangan yun kukunin yung certified copy galing sa korte, for example, ng California. Certified copy ng decree. So, baka hindi pa kompleto yung kanilang documents. May iba-ibang rason kung bakit yung proseso hindi tapos. Kung minsan, madedenay po yung kaso, then kailangan nila i-apela, iakit nila sa Court of Appeals to show that they actually did prove their case and then the divorce should be recognized.
Attorney, ito po ba ay itong recognitions of divorce ay para lang po doon sa mga non-Filipino?
Yung sitwasyon na ito can only be applied to marriages, to divorces where one of the spouses was a non-Filipino at the time of the divorce.
Yes.
So, ang importante na moment is the time of the divorce. So actually, it's possible na pareho silang Pilipino nung kinasal sila.
Correct.
Nag-immigrate sila sa US, tapos naging US citizen yung isa, tapos na-divorce sila. At that point, pwede ma-recognize yung divorce sa Pilipinas dahil what's important is at the time of the divorce, there is a non-Filipino involved when the divorce takes place.
Ano ito, attorney, na recognition process? Ano ito, administrative o talagang kakaso pa ito?
Kaso po siya. In order for any entry in our civil registry sa PSA po natin to be changed, kailangan mo ng court order. At dahil kailangan mo ng court order, kailangan mo mag-file ng kaso sa korte. May special proceeding po para dito. May requirements ito. You're supposed to inform the Office of the Solicitor General, yung civil registry system natin, kailangan silang ma-inform. Pati po yung ex-spouse, kailangan padala ng notice ng korte na merong kasong ganito dahil marriage record din nila ang involved.
So parang annulment case din, attorney.
In a sense, it is a trial, definitely, but in a sense, it's faster and it's more certain than annulment because ang ating annulment cases are usually for psychological incapacity. You're saying that from the time of the marriage, one of the spouses did not have the capacity to fulfill the marital obligations, and in a way, that's a subjective standard. So it depends po on the court on how it receives that argument. Pero for recognition of foreign divorce, you just need to prove the things I mentioned. You just need to prove that at the time of the divorce, one of the spouses is a non-Filipino, and then you present the documents, yung marriage certificate, yung divorce decree, at saka yung foreign marriage law. If all of those are authentic, then you can obtain the court decision granting recognition of foreign divorce.
Kaya pala, attorney, na may mga, limbawa, mga nag-migrant na mga Filipino, ayaw nila magpakasal dito sa Pilipinas, nagpapakasal sila sa ibang bansa. Dahil dyan sa divorce na yan.
Hindi naman po exactly there because what's important is not the location as much as the citizenship. Yung issues kasi with getting married overseas is that you can actually still get divorced whether you get married here in the Philippines or you get married outside the Philippines. What is the difference is that sa ibang bansa baka ma-recognize yung divorce mo dahil batas nila yun, pero under Philippine law says that your marital status is under the control of the Philippines no matter where in the world you are. So if you get married
Yes.
overseas, that's fine. But if you get divorced overseas, you can only be validly divorced if it is in accordance with what our law provides. And that our law provides that you can only get divorced abroad and have it recognized here if one of the spouses, either ikaw or yung asawa, is a non-Filipino.
Pero if you are legally married in other countries like in the US, kapag kasal kayo doon at ibig bang sabihin recognize ng Philippine law ang iyong kasal doon sa US na pag halimbawa, kinasal kayo sa US, pumunta kayo sa Pilipinas, dito kayo nanirahan pero sa US kayo kinasal,
Recognize yun.
recognize yung
Yung
kasal
family code?
nila ng Pilipinas at pagdating sa Pilipinas, kahit nag-divorce kayo duman, pagdating ba sa Pilipinas, hindi kayo pwede mag-asawa parehas kasi sa Pilipinas hindi kayo annulled?
Yes. Kung kayo po ay kinasal sa United States, tapos yung marriage na yun is valid in the Philippines.
Mhm.
As long as the marriage rite was performed, as long as the marriage process followed the requirements of US law, yung marriage will also be binding in the Philippines.
Paano yung divorce?
It's the divorce that will be has to be qualified. Pero yung marriage po talaga ay valid dun siya
valid yun.
kahit mangyari sa Estados Unidos.
Pero ang divorce, hindi automatic. That has to be qualified.
Hindi po automatic. Yung marriage automatic. Of course, there is a practical distinction or consideration in that yung Filipinas will have no way of knowing you actually got married, let's say, in the US, unless you report your marriage. And may
Okay.
proseso rin po tayo dyan. For example, may kakasal sa California or sa Chicago, they are encouraged to submit a report of marriage sa ating consulate, sa ating embassies doon, para po merong record yung ating PSA na kinasal sila.
Okay.
Regarding po attorney na doon sa ibang bansa siya ay divorce na. At pagpunta dito sa Pilipinas, nakakilala ng isang Pilipina, ikakasal siya. So i-recognize yung kanyang divorce? At pwede siyang magpakasal dito?
Kung nangyari po yung divorce sa kabilang bansa and at least one of the spouses was a non-Filipino, pwede pong ma-recognize yung divorce dito sa Pilipinas. But in order for them to validly remarry in the Philippines, they must first go through the recognition process in court. Ang sinabi
Hindi
po ng ating
automatic.
Korte Suprema is that in order to validly remarry, kailangan mo po munang magpa-dumaan sa court process for recognition of foreign divorce.
Yeah. Hindi automatic. Hindi automatic. Oo. So, kasal naman sa Pilipinas. Pilipinas kinasal, Pilipino ang isa, foreign ang isa. Pagdating ba doon sa lugar ng isa sa ibang bansa, yun ba automatic ang recognition ng kasal sa Pilipinas?
Typically, yes, sir. Practically, universally sa mga bansa sa mundo natin, if somebody gets married in one country, that marriage will be respected in other countries. It's just typically how in practice and in custom and in law, marriages give an effect. Yun po ang nagva-vary from country to country.
Kahit yung mga bansa na walang connection or walang treaty sa Philippines?
Yes, sir. It's just it's the custom of international law that basically, in the same way that of course, if Filipinos get married overseas and then they travel to the United States or they go to any other country, those two Filipinos are considered married. And then whether they happen to be a Filipino and a foreign citizen and then they travel there, they will still be considered to be married. Hindi po naman natin rin-require, for example, na yung mga bisita natin galing sa ibang bansa ay ikasal sa ilalim ng batas ng Pilipinas before we recognize yung nakasal yung mga iyon. Ganun din. And then vice versa also. All countries typically recognize that if people are married, then they are married anywhere.
For example, yung isang party ay citizen of that country, kailangan ba nilang i-register ang marriage nila sa Pilipinas? I-re-entry sa registration nila doon or hindi na kailangan?
Hindi naman po exactly kailangan, but if you want the marriage, if you want the Philippines to to have a record that you actually are married, then the PSA is the place for it. So kung gusto po nilang malaman ng gobyerno natin na kasal sila, then the way to do it is to file the registration.
Pero
But in terms of whether it is valid without the registration, valid pa rin siya.
Oh, so it's not necessary kung gusto lang nila.
Yes, of course, they're strongly encouraged to do that. It's not necessary for it to be valid, but in order for it to be known to the public and known to third persons, then the Philippine Civil Registry would be the place to put it.
Napakalinaw ng mga ating pinag-usapan ngayon. Attorney, punta tayo. Pwede ba natin pag-usapan yung process ng annulment sa Pilipinas? Kasi connected yun dyan. Attorney, bakit napakahirap ng process ng annulment sa Pilipinas? At napakamahal?
Well, una-una, because wala tayong divorce. Meron lang tayong annulment. And because it is annulment, it's a specific grounds ang meron siya for dissolving the marriage. Kasi kung ang divorce ay magkaroon ng separation yung mga parties, hindi ayaw na nila magsama, maybe nagkaroon ng third party or nagkaroon ng pag-aaway, hindi na pagkakaintindihan, and this break happened after the marriage, that's fine. They can file for divorce and they can say hindi na nila kaya magsama dahil may nangyari, so maghihiwalay na sila, they want the marriage to end. The grounds can exist after the marriage took place. Pero for annulment or declaration of nullity of marriage, it requires that the grounds must exist before the marriage ever took place, because these annulment or declaration of nullity, what they are is that they say that the marriage did not exist ever in some way. There was always some infirmity, and because of that, the marriage is subject to being declared null and void. In fact, basically, it's not ended in so much as it is sinasabing never nagkaroon ng kasal in the first place.
Yun ang annulment.
Because of that, medyo complicated po yung grounds. You need ang sa annulment, yes sir, because we were obliged to tell the court from the start there was psychological incapacity on the part of one of the spouses, for example. And because of that, you have to hire a psychologist to make an assessment, who will make a psychological report, who will testify in court, and that adds to the cost and to the time, because you will need more witnesses and you will need to convince the court that from the beginning, even though somehow 10 years na silang kasal or however long it was, from the beginning there was a infirmity na meron pong pagkukulang yung marriage that made it never valid in the first place, whether formally dahil walang marriage license or dahil may psychological incapacity yung one of the spouses and they were incapable of fulfilling their marital obligations.
Okay
So it's a high standard.
So kailangan mapatunayan na even before the marriage took place, kailangan may psychological problem lang isa sa kanila.
Yes, sir. So
paano
of course, that's difficult to
difficult.
prove
Paano, attorney, kung nag-took place o nangyari ang psychological problem in the middle o nasa gitna na ng kanilang pag-aasawa, for example 10 years silang mag-asawa, 5 years lang nag-took place yung psychological problem ng isa sa mga spouses.
Well, the argument in that case is that yung manifestation 5 years later was actually a demonstration of a condition that was already there at the beginning pa lang.
Okay, understand.
So they might yun yung kanila magiging premise or at least the argument of the petition for declaration of nullity. But of course, that does mean that, as you say, like you said, as you pointed out, that you can see the counter argument for saying na hindi rin, actually nangyari yan after. So you are in danger of the petition being denied.
Correct.
So it's possible na ma-deny siya. That's also why when counsel handle annulment cases, they try to present as many relevant witnesses as possible to show that talagang the conditions were existing before pa.
Before
Kasi
marriage.
otherwise, baka ma-deny siya.
Actually po, ang pinakadiliman natin dito, attorney, ngayon sa Pilipinas ay both parties have the same, mayroon na silang pamilya, kanya-kanyang pamilya. At ang iba ay nagsasama na mga 10 years to 20 years na pero hindi sila na-annul. So nagkakaroon ngayon ng mga broken families, and that is the dilemma na hinaharap natin lalo na sa kami mga pastors.
Yes, that's it. There's no easy answer to that. Right now, the divorce law remains under argument. Every time there is a new Congress, they pass the bill. The House of Representatives approves it, but the Senate does not. And as matters stand, what we have is annulment only. And if they want to dissolve the marriage legally, they have to go through the annulment process, and they have to prove it under the grounds that we have right now, because there are no other legal grounds available except for death.
So ano-anong mga specific grounds, attorney, na pwede nating masabi for the nullity of marriage in the Philippines?
For nullity of marriage, essentially, there is may pagkukulang po sa essential or formal requirements of the marriage. You could say that walang consent for getting married, walang capacity, or meron pong walang marriage ceremony. So if those cases take place, for example, I've encountered situations where nakalagay sa marriage certificate, they got married on a certain date. Pero if you check the travel records ng Bureau of Immigration, actually wala sa Pilipinas yung isang asawa at that time. So it was impossible for there to be a marriage ceremony. And
Tama, no?
that's a way to prove na there was no marriage ceremony that took place.
Yeah.
And then another one is walang marriage license, and then of course yung most usual one is the argument of psychological incapacity. Sasabihin na this is Article 36 of the Family Code, na if at the time of the celebration of the marriage there was psychological incapacity on the part of one or both of the spouses, then the marriage can be declared null and void. So psychological incapacity though it's a legal term that is open somewhat to interpretation. So that's what the argument sa korte comes to. Like they prove na through the history of this person or these persons na from the start may psychological incapacity. Hindi niya fulfill ang kanyang marital obligations, and that proves that talagang dapat ma-declare null and void yung marriage.
Wow, so malilinawin natin attorney, yung pagkakaiba ng divorce sa annulment. Ang divorce kasi is ikakat yung marriage. Ang divorce may kasal na nangyari. Ang annulment is null and void.
Walang kasal
Na nangyari. Technically.
Well, ang declaration of nullity is null and void. Walang kasal at all. Yung divorce is merong kasal, tapos it ended at a certain point in time.
Yes.
The main distinction between them would be that the grounds exist from the beginning of the marriage for declaration of nullity or annulment. Whereas for divorce, the grounds can exist after.
Yes.
So, yun yung difference. And also, the main difference is that sa Pilipinas, wala pa rin tayong divorce.
Kaya pala, napakahirap talagang hanapan ng yung annulment kasi hindi ganun kadali i-prove.
Yes, unless you happen to have situations like that, na walang marriage license pala, and then they were required to have a marriage license. I mean, of course, as pastor, sir, you would know that not everybody is required to have a marriage license.
Yes, of course.
So kung nagsama sila for 5 years already without impediment, pwede silang magkaroon ng marriage without a marriage license. But that's also something that can be examined. I've had a case, for example, where kinasal sila, but if you look at it, kinasal sila without a marriage license. The claim is kinasal sila without needing a marriage license, but actually you could see from their travel records also, dahil nabuhay sa ibang bansa, nag-OFW for some years yung person, na it was mathematically impossible for them to live together for 5 years.
Correct.
So, if they need a marriage license and they got married without one, that's a fairly straightforward ground for dissolving the marriage under nullity. But most of the time, talagang psychological incapacity yung resort ng tao kasi the documents and the requirements are not open to question.
Ang attorney, ang concubinage o adultery ay kasama sa basis ng annulment?
It can be demonstrative of psychological incapacity. It is not in itself a ground for for annulment, but it can demonstrate the incapacity of the person to fulfill their marital obligations. Kung meron siyang history na of adultery or concubinage, then you can show that this demonstrates na talagang may psychological incapacity yung spouse na ito.
Pero mahirap yun, attorney, kasi kailangan mong ma-prove that ever since ganun talaga siya.
Yes, and that's also why the psychologist is often resorted to. Dahil kung yung psychologist can examine the history and say that this is demonstrative of a condition where talagang this person, for example, they might say may narcissistic personality that renders this person incapable of fulfilling the obligations. So you prove the case by various pieces of evidence, yung witness na yung asawa mismo, yung psychologist, yung may kilala sa magkaparehong mag-asawa. They can put together a picture for the court that talaga may incapacity. But again, it's a painstaking and it's a deliberately built case.
Matindi pala talagang pagdadaanan mo, Karen. Kailangan ingat-ingat ka bago ka magpakasal.
Kaya nga eh.
Oo. Anyway, attorney, sa mga nagtatanong,
Yes, of course.
sa mga nagtatanong, attorney, kayo ba ay tumatanggap ng mga annulment cases?
Yes, we do. Our law office, we do handle cases of different kinds, yung recognition of divorce and other cases involving, in fact, cross-country concerns and annulment and also family matters and well, our office is a full. We handle all sorts of legal matters. So if people would have some questions, we have a website namin sa www.lawyerphilippines.org. They can send us queries and we'll be happy to address any questions.
Will you accept cases like in Bicol region?
Oh yes, all over the country po kami ang nagagawa namin, and we handle cases. Sometimes we work with local counsel as well, and sometimes we handle them directly and we go there. So if they have questions, lawyerphilippines.org yung website namin, we'll be happy to discuss if either we can help them or at least answer their questions.
Paano, attorney, kung ikaw mismo ang abogadong gusto nilang kunin, okay ba yun?
Opo naman. I mean, our office, we work together, and I am part of the office. That would be really part of the work.
So anong hahanapin nila, attorney, ano yun na attorney, .org? Lawyerphilippines.org. So makakarating yan sa inyo ang mga queries nila.
Yes po, sa lawyerphilippines.org, we'll be happy to address them there.
Kasi talaga namang marami talaga ang, sa totoo lang marami ang gusto nang mag-end yung kanilang marriage. Kasi yung sinabi nga kanina ni Karuni, wala na magagawa may mga asawa na both parties. Kailangan na talagang gawing legal ang kanilang pag-iwalay.
Yes. Well, until there is a divorce law in the Philippines, annulment really would be the process. And as I said, the only way really for marriages to end sa Pilipinas is through declaration of nullity, annulment, or death of one of the spouses. Attorney,
maraming salamat po sa iyong halagang oras sa umagang ito. Marami na naman kaming natutunan. Looking forward for the next discussion natin sa mga susunod na pag-uusap natin dito sa programang Oras na Pilipinas, Bicolandia. Pagpalain ka ng Diyos, attorney. Ingat ka po.
Salamat po, Sir Rico, Sir Ronnie, at ingat din po kayo.
God bless, attorney.
Yun, pambira.
Hindi natin nabasa itong sabi ni Sek.
Ay, ngayon lang dumating, Sek. Anong sabi dito? Good morning po. May kiss po, Sir H. Have a new husband na babae at yung husband niya meron na rin. Ayun na nga eh.
Actually, na-discuss na natin yan.
Na-discuss natin yun. Na kailangan pa rin talaga ng annulment.
Annulment din na process sa SEC.
Kahit pa may asawa na parehas, annulment pa rin. Hindi magiging legal ang pagsasama ng both parties hanggang walang annulment. At medyo napakahirap ng annulment process. Attorney Ronnie.
Actually, mayroon kaming members na nagpa-process ng annulment.
Oo,
napakahirap talaga.
Napakahirap talaga. Napakahirap. Ano, kaya sa mga listeners natin ngayon, huwag kang magpapakasal hanggat hindi ka
Nako!
sigurado.
Mm-mm.
Totoo lang. Huwag daanin sa pa-cute.
Ang problema man, sir, abo na ugaring magpakarasal kang iba.
Ayun na nga niyan. Dahil man yan pwede na magiribana na lang kamo dali kasal. Disrespect yan sa magurang, disrespect yan sa
Ang
Diyos.
pinakamagayon,
Oo.
ipangaji tabi, pilion, siya sa aton munan sa imong magom.
Iyo, imaginein mo kung siya na ba talaga ang gusto mong makasama habang ikaw ay nabubuhay. Huwag magpadala sa nararamdaman.
Oo.
Lalong-lalo na pag hindi pa naman kamo matagal na magkakilala.
Yay. Lalo na kung may in psychology incapacity.
Mhm.
Tapos 5 years pa lumabas. Nako.